my new book is coming out soon, as you know, Hide Your Children, Exposing the Marxists Behind the Attack on America's Kids. You can pre-order it now at hideyourchildrenbook.com. There's another book, though, that is coming out, or that came out this week, that you should also read. It actually pairs wonderfully with my book because it's about a very similar topic. It's written by Chris Rufo. You know him, you love him. He wrote America's Cultural Revolution, How the Radical Left Conquered Everything. And he and I analyze what's happened in our country, the capture of our institutions, from a very similar perspective. But we have some fundamental differences on what the Republican Party and the conservative movement should do to recapture these institutions and reorder our society. We had the best conversation talking about our similarities and our differences. You guys are going to love it. Here's Chris Rufo.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you.
Okay, so first of all, the cover of your book is super cool looking. I really like that. I know that's apropos of nothing on the inside, but it really is cool from an artistic standpoint. The subtitle of your book is the thing that intrigued me the most. America's Cultural Revolution, How the Radical Left Conquered Everything. First of all, I do want you to explain what you mean by that for anybody who hasn't read the book yet. But my big question, just given the premise of your book, is how did the left accomplish the entirety of the institutional capture that they have accomplished?
Yeah, I mean, that is really the subject of the book. It's the left's progression of institutional and ideological capture, beginning with a small group of far-left radicals in the late 1960s. And then, as we saw during the summer of 2020, the great summer of George Floyd, it seemed like every institution in our society, from the federal government to the Fortune 100 companies, to the universities, to the media, to the K through 12 schools, was in lockstep behind BLM ideology. And the question that I had was, how did this happen? How did all of a sudden it seem like all these institutions had been captured? Where did it originate? How did they do it? What was the march through the institutions? And so what I do in the book is really peel back the layers of the onion. It reveal the answers to that question and show exactly how they executed the long march through the institutions, and it basically created the situation that we find ourselves in today.
Well, at the risk of asking you to betray all the goodies that are in the books, can you give us an example? I think a lot of people sitting here are like, okay, I get that. There was this group of people with a poisonous ideology whose object was the destruction of Western civilization. But like who and what institutions and how did they go about actually capturing it? Because I might say, hey, I'd like to be in charge of all of the Ivy League, the ideology at the Ivy League universities, but you don't just get to announce that and it happens. How do they do it?
Yeah, well, the four tentpoles of the book are biographical portraits of the neo-Marxist philosopher Herbert Marcuse, the black communist radical and presidential candidate Angela Davis, the neo-Marxist educational theorist Paulo Freire, and then the godfather of critical race theory, Derek Bell. And it really, why I did this, why I structured the book around these four biographical portraits, was to show that it wasn't a huge organization, it wasn't a vast conspiracy, it was actually just the dedicated, focused work of small groups of people. And these were the four kind of leading prophets of their movement that were able to take these ideas that had been discredited, that had been discarded, that had been really crushed in the political debate of the era, late 1960s, early 1970s. They went underground, they burrowed into the institutions, they used the transmission belts like the graduate schools of education, they used the university philosophy and critical theory programs, they used the HR bureaucracies and the DEI initiatives to gain a foothold in these institutions and then impose their ideology on everyone else around them. And that's exactly what they did. They took, over the course of more than 50 years, to the point, though, where after 2020, it seemed like you had a DEI bureaucrat breathing down your neck at work. You had a radical critical race theorist shoving propaganda, down your kid's throat in schools. And then the narrative on television was that everyone in the society, including all the CEOs of the big companies, were posting the black square and kneeling before BLM. And so it really is a wild ride. It's a history full of twists and turns. But the basic concept is the long march to the institutions and the capture of the institutions from within.
And I think that's been something that maybe it started with parents who were looking over their children's shoulders at Zoom school and they saw how captured our education system was or is, and they kind of realized, well, it's not just education, that this institutional capture is pretty prevalent in our society, something that a lot of people had kind of been blind to because it hadn't touched them in a really serious way. I think it's a really important topic. Who are the people now that are in charge of this, if you will? Because a lot of the people that you mentioned, Derek Bell or Angela Davis, yes, Angela Davis is still alive, Paulo Freire is not. Who are the people now who are the primary people pushing this?
That's actually a really interesting part of the story and part of the process. Initially, it's very identifiable. There is a small political movement. There are its leaders, its writers, its thinkers, its activists, and it's very much identifiable on an individual basis because of the size and scale of the political activity at the time. Today, though, it's impossible to say, hey, here are the great figures. You could say it's Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo and a couple of other people, but that's actually not really accurate, although they're symbols of the movement as it is today. And the reason is that this is now a decentralized movement dispersed through society, established as conventional wisdom, established as DEI policy. And so it is a business, it is an industry, it is a sector, it is a kind of an octopus with its tentacles seemingly in all of the institutions. And therefore, it's not accurate, as much as I would like it to be true, to say, hey, this is a movement of these, 5, 10 people, these are the people who are leading it. It's more a system of incentives because it's no longer individuals with an ideology seeking to impose it. It's actually the institutions themselves that have absorbed the ideology, and now its changes, its transformations happen bureaucratically. They happen on committees. They happen according to institutional consensus. And so it is dispersed, which makes it harder to identify in some ways, but also harder to defeat, because you not only have to win over the public debate, you not only have to be the better adversary against these individual figures, but you actually have to reform the deepest structures of the institutions. That's where the fight is today. It's not an easy one, but the left has had a 50-year head start. If we want to change the tide, if we want to change these institutions, we have to get started.
Well, I'm glad you brought up DEI, because I thought one of the parts that interested me most in your book was when you were talking about where DEI programs in modern America come from. We've talked about often on this show how DEI is really a Maoist thought reform tactic. It's just been rebranded in modern America. And you talk about how essentially modern neo-Marxists rebranded it. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's really one of the interesting little threads in the book. And as I wove together all the narratives and did all the research and really dug into the archives, I discovered a really interesting tidbit. Herbert Marcuse, the neo-Marxist philosopher who was the father of the New Left, he was the mentor and sometimes the teacher of radicals in the Weather Underground, radicals in the Black Panther Party, radicals in the Communist Party USA. He was the central kind of ideological father figure for these movements. And his third wife, who was a former student of his, about 40 years his junior, took some of his ideas, his Marxist ideology, and then repackaged it for corporate America, but way back in the 1970s.
Hi guys, it's Liz Wheeler. Don't forget to watch my show, The Liz Wheeler Show, every night at 7 p.m. on the First TV. You can download the free First TV app, or you can visit thefirsttv.com/Liz and start watching today.